Hello there, everyone. This will be our first official game review for the Gold Beach Chess Club. It meets every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. in Gold Beach, Oregon, USA, at First Chapter Coffee House. This is a great game. The first game that we'll be looking at today will be a game that I played against Mark. And Mark had the white pieces, so it was a very interesting game. Hope you enjoy it. Hello everyone, we're just going to review a game that was played on November 1st at the Gold Beach Chess Club. I was playing the black pieces against Mark, a club member, and he has the white pieces. And so here I played f5, going for a Dutch setup. Now the thing we might mention about this here is that Mark's usual setup is to go for some sort of collie system, where you just have an idea of how you would like to set up your pieces, and if black ever castles. Kingside, you have a really ready-made attack waiting for that king, because you have the bishop pair, and they both look off to that side of the board, and there's all sorts of fun things that can happen. The collie is quite a topical opening, and in fact, recently, it was played at the World Cup. Faustino Oro played it against Ante Brikic. I might be mispronouncing his name there, Mr. Brikic. But these are two GMs, and Faustino Oro is probably the youngest GM in the world. And so after several opening moves in their game, we get to what is considered a collie system here. It essentially becomes a reverse note bomb variation. And it was a really interesting game, and Oro ended up winning. He was playing the white pieces, and very beautiful game. So the collie system isn't always a matter of just playing a set system. No matter what your opponent does, you have to take into account what they're going to do. And that's precisely what young GM Oro did in this game. To avoid any of these setups, I played the Dutch defense. Or I'm aiming for a Dutch defense. We'll see if we get that. Knight f3, a good move. Knight f6, good move. Knight c3. Now, for his usual setup, he may have preferred to have played e3, then bishop d3, then knight bd2, and then c3, or if he's playing it like it's a collie Zucator, b2, b3, and then bishop b2. This would have been more in keeping with the practical knowledge about the setups he has. And here, though, this knight to c3 is going in a different direction. There's nothing really wrong with this move, but it does block in the c-pawn, and typically you want the c-pawn to influence what's going to happen on d5 and b5. It helps with your control over the center, but that's not possible when the knight's on c3. e6. So my plan is to play this like a Nimzo Indian, so it would be a Dutch Nimzo or Nimzo Dutch, depending on which opening you get into it from. I'm going to put the bishop on b4 and create a pin. I would lose the bishop pair, because I would be giving up this black bishop for this knight on c3. But I'm hoping to get greater control over the square e4 with my knight. Maybe this bishop, should it go to b7, if I fianchetto over there. But the other thing is, if I can double these pawns up onto the c-file, that could be a weakness in the endgame for the first player. And so Mark is looking to maybe avoid that if he can. Now this bishop g5 is a bit of a controversial move. It's true, it does put a pin on my knight to my queen, so I can't just move the knight without suffering the loss of the 9-point piece, the queen. But it's interesting, in a lot of these Nimzo Dutch setups, when you do fianchetto and put the bishop on b7, pardon me, this knight very often can go to g5 and threaten some attacks on e6 after black goes d7, d6 to try and push through e5. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to put your bishop on g5. You might want to put a knight there. And if you have the bishop pair, you may just want to keep the bishop pair. So instead of that, like let's say, he were to play where he's brought in the pawn to c4. Okay, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. Now if I exchange off this, after let's say a move like e3, if I exchange off this bishop for his knight, it's true I double his pawns up, but he still has both bishops, and that's a valuable asset. And he still has this square g5 to use for his knight later on. This would probably be a better setup than what was elected for in the game. a3 asks my bishop a question after I put the pin on. The question is, move it or lose it? You going to stay there and be captured? Well, I follow through with my threat. I capture his knight, and I double his pawns up. Now I'm going to try my queenside fianchetto. He's bolstering his center. It's very solid. Still, that bishop on g5 is a little bit of a problem. It also won't be able to get behind the pawns now and help defend. That could be relevant at some point later on in the game. Bishop b7, giving me more control over e4. The pawn, the knight, the bishop all influence that square. Bishop d3, trying to counter that influence by getting another set of eyes on it. That bishop on d3. Castles. Castles. King safety. So in the opening, you want to control the center. You want to develop your team. And you need king safety. Now that doesn't always mean castling. Usually it does. The other item on your list should be to try and create threats too. So here I finally asked the bishop a question. It was answered. He says, I'm going to keep my bishop. The problem for him now is, of course, he can't just go knight to g5 because pawn takes knight. So I'm going to start with my attack on e5. I'm going to play d6 and go knight bd7, maybe queen e8, queen e7, and push the pawn to e5. Just a very crude pawn push strategy. Now, something to exploit that could have been to go knight g5, threatening to capture the pawn and forking the rook and the queen. But you can't do that now that there's a pawn on h6 because you just lose your knight. You would just be captured. So this is why that bishop to g5 may not have been such a good idea. Rook e1, looking to force it through. g5, asking another question. Bishop g3. Queen e8. This was not the best move. I step into the line of fire of the rook, which could be a problem potentially. A better move would have been something like knight h5. And had he moved a pawn, I could then damage the pawns around his king by capturing that bishop. I would also get rid of his bishop pair too. This would have been a much better move than my queen e8. h3, so he's looking to save that piece, knight bd7, with the ideas of going to e5. Bishop c4, looking to use the pin on the pawn against my king. Prevents me from pushing the pawn, obviously. Knight to e4, threatening his bishop and threatening to capture a freebie pawn over on c3. He saves the bishop, but I decide I don't want the pawn because it's a bad pawn. I feel like I can round it up later on. I'm more concerned about trying to get my attack underway against the white king. So I get the queen up here. She defends laterally that e6 pawn, like a rook would, from g6. My king is still in the way of this pin, though, so I do have to address that at some point. Probably earlier than later would be better. Rook to b1. Now this is too much temptation for me to resist, and I snap off the pawn because I'm winning an exchange. My plan is to get the other knight over to e4 now, after I get a material advantage. And after this move, I'm already up essentially 3 pawns by the assessment of Stockfish 17.1 on Lee Chess. It already feels like black is up 3 solid pawns. That's a minor piece, a knight or a bishop. Queen d2, which unfortunately allows me to attack the queen by capturing the rook. He recaptures with his rook, which was his intention anyways. And now my pieces are all lining up. The rooks are centralized. I'm looking to crash through on the king side and create all sorts of problems for the first player there. Mark is looking to try and stymie those efforts. I break the pin immediately, so this bishop no longer pins this knight to my rook on e8, because the rook's plan is to go to e7 and move over and to attack over on the king side. So it's going to be lifted over to the attack. It can even double up with the other rook at some point. Rook to b4. Here it feels like Mark was maybe casting about for a plan. He plays a move that doesn't really achieve anything. He's trying to figure out what he can do, and this is because of the problems he's having. He has less space. I have a pretty set up attack, pretty ready-made. He's down material. His pieces really aren't all that coordinated. They don't have good squares to go to because I'm controlling a lot of these squares. So there are problems for him. But this rook lift doesn't really do much. Like, the idea might be to move the pawn and defend laterally. But that's not really going to help him, because that ends up allowing me to emphasize my control over these squares with the knight move to f6. And I'm just going to crash through on the king side anyways. So my plan is just very straightforward, is to get this h-pawn over to h4, get the rook behind it, or maybe put the rook to g7 and just crash through and try and deliver checkmate. This knight is no longer here on d7, so there's no worries about it being captured. So Mark's next move was bishop to d3, back again, jiggity jig, h5. I'm also preventing any g2, g4 shenanigans where you might try and utilize a pin against my queen on this pawn on f5. And I just want to get my attack rolling through. So we'll see. Queen to d1. These pieces are kind of spectators now. I have a pretty basic plan. I have more space, better control over the board. Mark is just trying to figure out what to do. And unfortunately for him, there isn't that much he can do here. He starts to try and evacuate his king over towards the center or towards the queen side. But my plan is proceeding. Pretty clockwork here. He gives up a pawn. When you are in a losing position, you should try and make the positions that follow as murky as possible, because in chaos, opportunity does present itself sometimes. And if you can make the position complex enough, perhaps the other guy goes wrong. Unfortunately here, I have more than enough control over the d5 square, where I just pocket the pawn. After bishop to c4, I capture, and he recaptures. This rook does defend c7, so there's no threat of him just taking that for any sort of gain in material or attack. g4, the attack continues. Knight to d4, threatening that pawn. But here, I'm just getting ready to go queen takes g2 and win a bishop. So he tries to flee. And queen g4 invites him to play f3, and then queen takes g2 check, winning a piece. He doesn't fall for it, so he just merely says, okay, I'm in check. What are my three options? Can I capture the piece? Nope. Can I block? I could, but that's not going to work out for me so well. He could have blocked with the knight as well. Can I move away? Yeah, I can move away. But when you're up material, one of your rules of thumb is to exchange down. And this allows you to keep the win in hand. So I exchange off the queens. And now I've got all these beautiful pawns here. I have all 8 of my pawns. He only has 4. I have a rook versus bishop. I have a huge material edge. And after this move, knight to e4 threatens this pawn. He defends. e5 just kind of blunts the bishop some more. Can't land on f4 when there's a pawn here on e5. And the knight can't go back to d4 because the pawn looks at that square as well. on e5. It guards both squares. And that explains why he tries to play some moves over here, but his rook is essentially trapped. And then I just end up running him out of some moves where he gives up the rook for the knight, but there's a pawn guarding it. And now his knight is essentially trapped. And when he tries to play some moves, more moves, I just simply prevent him from playing any other moves. And when he tries to let the knight out, I just break through with a pawn, and now there will be no way for him to defend the position. Eventually, a pawn will promote, or I'll win more material and then promote a pawn. So in this position, he did resign. It was a very interesting game, and my thanks to Mark and all the members of the Gold Beach Chess Club that come down and play. It's a good group of folks. If you're local to the Southern Oregon coast, we do invite you to come down. We currently meet at First Chapter Coffee House every Saturday, 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. And if you have your own set and clock, BYO, bring your own. We do have some limited extras available on hand. Anyways, always play the best moves in the game of life, and stay well, be well.